Hello, and believe it or not, we are once again just under a couple of weeks out from yet another pre-release. This time for OP15 EB04. This is another extra large set with some out of whack ratios and some pretty exciting cards. And in this video, I'm going to be covering everything you need to know about the event, some general tips for pre-release, and then we'll be talking about the cards in OP15, and I've picked out some of my favourites. So starting off the event info, this runs from March 27th to April 2nd at Bandai stores and your favourite LGSs. For the exact dates, you'll have to check with your store, or you can check on the Bandai TCG Plus app. These events can be run as constructed or sealed. Pretty much everyone that I know runs these as sealed. Constructed's very boring for this type of event. We play that every week at your locals, on the sim, at regionals. So running these as sealed is more fun, and the majority of this video will be focusing on sealed. And for participating, you're not only going to get the Rainbow Luffy leader, who can be used in the tournament, you're also going to get this 6-7 Boa promo. This was a very niche pick back when Boa first came out. You don't see this card anymore very much. With the quality of cards just increasing in this deck, I think this one's relatively unlikely to see play. You're also going to get a pre-release pack for participating, and that's going to contain 2 cards of either common or uncommon rarity with this release event stamp, like you can see on this shoe in the top right. And if you are lucky enough to win, you're going to get the full art version of the Boa promo from the previous slide. Nice looking card, again, not too meta relevant, so I don't think this one would be too crazy, but it is Boa, so who knows. Now, what to bring? Well, if this is your first pre-release event, welcome. These events are a great time to get into the game. They're really chill, really fun, and everyone at your locals will be more than willing to teach you how to play the game and things like that. So you're going to need to bring a set of sleeves to protect your cards, a playmat in case the table's a bit sticky, some dice to keep track of power down and things like that, a leader card if needed, and we will be discussing choose a leader format on the following slides, and you will also need 10 Don cards. If you don't have Don, don't worry, someone at your locals will be able to give you a playset of Comp and Don, or you can even just use backwards cards or empty sleeves if you really want to. Now, in terms of the rules for sealed, you're going to open 6 packs of OP15, and then you're going to need to build a 40 card deck. Little bit smaller than in standard constructed. There are no color restrictions, so if you were to play a mono red leader, you can include green cards, you can include purple cards, include whatever you like, and there are also no card count restrictions. So if you pull 5 of the same card, you can include all of them in your deck. And the rest of your pulls are going to be your sideboard. We don't have sideboards in the One Piece card game. However, in between rounds, if in round 1 you find a card that you didn't read properly, as card game players, I'm sure we can all relate to that one, or if you just didn't understand the way that the card interacted with the game, well, you can swap it out and put something else in from your sideboard. Now, in terms of general tips for pre-release, board control is as important in pre-release as it is in constructed. If your opponent just has a bunch of characters, you're going to end up getting rolled very, very quickly. So finding the balance between pressuring their life adequately so that you don't fall too far behind, but also dealing with their characters when you can efficiently, is just a fundamental of the game. Blockers are invaluable, but be aware of what your opponent could do to get around them. There are often less ways to get around blockers in sealed compared to constructed, where everyone's playing DMGs and Hody Jones. But even in sealed, there are still cards that will rest your blockers, that will deny them from blocking, that will blow them up. So being aware of what's in the set and how your opponent could respond to you presenting a blocker is very important. Know when you've lost the board. There will be games where your opponent gets a lucky trigger, maybe their character's just better than yours. So setting up to win in 2 turns is important in sealed as it is in constructed. You're not going to be able to win the board every game, and you don't have to kill every character in your opponent's deck. You just have to kill their leader. And when attacking effects are generally stronger in sealed than they are in constructed, due to a lack of removal or stun. Of course, there will still be removal pieces and stun pieces in every set, but your opponent is going to have far less of those than they would in your average constructed deck. Now, how does sealed work? So the first way that most stores choose to do sealed is with Rainbow Luffy. Rainbow Luffy is considered a leader with all colors, names, attributes, and types. This serves to make it that the majority of your card pool at least works. It might not be good, but it'll at least work with your leader. Oh my god, I'm very small. There we are. So for example, this Jaguar Diesel on his trigger says if your leader is Nico Robin, you can play this card. Well, our leader has every name, which includes Nico Robin. Perona requires your leader to have the slash attribute for her effect. Well, Luffy has the strike attribute, but he's considered to have all attributes. So he's considered to have the slash attribute, and thus Perona will work. And finally, my favourite one, we can never get rid of them, even when they rotate. The Kung Fu Dugong. If you have a Kung Fu Dugong in play, other than this character game's blocker. Well, Luffy has every name. And believe it or not, that includes Kung Fu Dugong. So he will be a blocker. Now, if your store is not doing Rainbow Luffy and they're doing Choose a Leader, these are some of the best ones. Broadly, Red Sanji is kind of still just the best leader. He's very, very good. Rush is invaluable in Prerelease. You just get effectively a turn ahead of your opponent. Although I will say, as the prevalence of actual vanillas decreases across time, there are more and more like good on plays. So sometimes your card pool might have too many on plays for this guy to get actually that much value. In terms of other leaders, I used to have Yamato on here, but Yamato's been feeling a little bit underwhelming in recent formats I've found. So I think generally these green leaders are all pretty good. Zoro, if you don't have a very good card pool, can interact with your opponent's board and then interact with their face. Mihawk can regenerate you some extra dons, which is kind of nice. Lets you swing reliably for a lot bigger with your leader. And if you are playing into like Rainbow Luffy leaders, they have the slash attribute. So you will be a 6k leader, which is pretty cool. And Bonnie is probably my pick for the second best leader. Just generically being able to rest one of your opponent's guys every turn. It's pretty good. It's one of the best defensive abilities we've seen. And it's no joke. Well, what if you wanted to play a new leader? Well, honestly, good luck this set. These are all pretty bad, I'm not going to lie. Rebecca is miserable. She cannot attack, and she needs a very specialized package. Krieg doesn't work if you have non-East Blue characters, which you're going to struggle to meet that condition in this format. Brook, again, needs a lot of very specific cards to make his deck work. And for life, you're just going to get rolled over. Enel is possibly one of the worst leaders for this format because you have 6 Don. So immediately a bunch of your card pool is out of the window. If you don't pull 6 cost Enel, like, good luck. Lucy is an interesting one, and depending on how many events you actually pull, it could be, like, not the worst, but still, I think you're going to need disproportionately more specific events than those that you're going to pull in the set. And probably the most interesting one is the leader that's not from OP15, is Bonnie. Beating a 7k on defense once you get to 1 is pretty good. And being able to do a bit of power down. But I think if you don't get enough healing options or like leader buff options, you're not going to be the same defensive menace as Bonnie can be in Constructed. Because you're only going to be at 7. You're not going to be able to go to 9 reliably. And once you go to 0, you're not going to be able to heal reliably. So, personally, I think all of these are pretty bad. If I had to pick a best, probably Lucy. Now, in terms of what you do want to include in your deck, firstly, all 2Ks. In this set, I'll be talking about this later. Maybe not the case. This is just a template. But 2Ks generically are more counter than 1Ks. Who would have thought? Vanillas have big stat lines and counter, so you are going to want to play those. Blockers give you flexibility in your gameplay. You can attack with them, you can leave them upright to deny your opponent lethal, and blockers just give you more versatility, so generally all blockers are worth including. Most cards with vanilla stat lines, I like to call them Vanill-ish cards, and we'll be discussing the ones in this set again further in the video, but these are just big cards. They usually have pretty good effects, and they're in general some of the most powerful cards. And then after that, powerful plays, which are just what you think are good cards. I do have some slides of my own, though, towards the end of particularly powerful cards. And after that, use your intuition. There's a lot of bad cards, especially in purple and blue in this set, so it shouldn't be too difficult. And if you do make mistakes, that's what the sideboard's for. Now, what to avoid? Firstly, attacking units with under 5,000 power. An example from this set is Gadatsu. In Enel, he's great. You can put a bunch of rested dons on him and then attack. Although this one of the pre-sim specific is probably the worst of the bunch, even in Enel. But in sealed, like, you might attack with this for 5k on your 3-don turn if you find it on 1 and don't use his on play. But, like, this is really, really bad after your 3-don turn. Combo pieces with few targets, for example, Raki. Yes, she is a blocker, and I just told you to include all blockers. However, there are exceptions, and this stat line is cheeks. And if you don't have a 3-cost Chandian Warrior in your hand, and a good one at that, you're just wasting your time. Archetype lock cards like this Ors. He has 0 power. If you have a big Moria, he's great. He has 7k. But in general and sealed, that's not going to be the case, and this guy is just going to be awful. And finally, Searchers. Just because they whiff. Like, in Constructed, if you want to play this Django that's a top 3 East Blue Searcher, you're going to have, 40, 45 East Blue type cards in your deck, and he's never going to whiff, which is really, really nice for your consistency. But in Sealed, you're not going to pull 40 East Blue type characters. You might have, like, 10 to 15 on a good day. So these Searchers, unless they have other effects that are good, they're just not worth playing. Now, my god, there are a lot of 2Ks in this set. An ungodly amount. This is page 1 of 3, I believe. Holy shit, and all of these are pretty underwhelming. If you want to pause and read what all of these cards do, feel free. But generally, most of these just have very low power, so they're not going to be attacking threats. The anti-removal 2Ks, which are new down at the bottom in this set, they're not as relevant for this format because removal's just not going to be as popular. However, if you do want to play one of these, the Nola, I think, is the best one. Followed by Perona. And none of these guys have effects that are really blowing me out of the water. So I'm going to skip past all of these, but take a screen grab if you want to see which 2Ks I think are underwhelming. Now, good 2Ks. There are less of these, but there are still some that are pretty relevant. These ones on the left, they are mainly here because of their stat line. Whilst 3-4 isn't great, it's not the worst. And considering this is mostly going to be a 2K, and then you can, in a pinch, play it as an emergency unit, it's not the worst. This Praham also gets you a heal, which is pretty cool if your opponent does try and take him out in Rainbow Luffy. The Kaku can do some protection, but probably not. And Luffy is really quite large in your opponent's turn, so it's going to be hard to take him out. Law's conditional, but his condition is going to be met most of the time. Mont Blanc Noland probably isn't giving Rush, but he's still a 4-5. And the Mihawk's mostly, again, just a 4-5, but does have some potential combo potential. That's a funny way to say it. And these ones on the right are mainly here for their effects. Yorkie can give your Brook leader, basically, if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, an extra 2,000 power for 1 Don, so you go plus 1k in value at the end of the game. Ganfowl can rest a Chump Blocker in an emergency, but you do have to have a Sky Island type character with 7,000 power to make him worthwhile. Hasami's effect is never going to be live, but he is an emergency blocker, and that's better than a lot of the stuff on this on these slides. And Pacifista, if you are running Rainbow Luffy, you will have Jewelry Bonnie, so this can again be a blocker in emergency. Final one, and this isn't really a 2K, but it sort of is it's my Student's Farewell. I want it to be proper. There's a Rayleigh buff, but on counter, it protects any character or Silver's Rayleigh, which your Rainbow Luffy leader is. And it also has a main effect, which is not the worst. Now, Vanilla 2Ks. We love the Vanilla 2Ks. They are some of the best 2Ks. Which is kind of cursed, but... in this set, we have 5 of them. They're all 5/6s. There isn't a yellow one. Don't really know why, but here we are. These have also been changed back to uncommon rarity. I don't know what they're doing with these Vanilla 2Ks. They've always been uncommons. In set 14, they changed them to commons. Now they've changed them back. What a time to be alive. Now, in terms of the raw number of 2Ks in this set, there is an insane amount. I think they've sort of added those 6 anti-removal 2Ks on top. And also most of the EB04 2Ks happen to be in red, black, or yellow. Especially black. There were like 3 or 4 in black, I think, alone. Which is kind of crazy. But regardless, that's going to result in you getting an insane amount of 2Ks in this set. Don't be afraid to cut some. You're not, if you pull 18 to 22Ks, You're not going to need them all. I'd personally not include too many more than like 12 to 14. So you're going to have a lot of this slide worth of bad ones. You'll be able to cut a lot of these. So be ruthless with your 2k counts. And believe it or not, look at Chopper. He's crying because he is the only vanilla in the set. There's only one. Chopper's good. 4/6 stat line is solid. 1k counter. You're going to play this card. It's kind of sad that there's only one left. I don't know. I wonder if we'll get no vanillas next set. What a time to be alive. Next up, Vanill-ish cards. And this is often where a lot of the best cards in the set sit. Because they've got big stat lines. Usually pretty good effects. And these are some of them. We'll start in the top left. We've got 3 4/6s. Zoro, Eels, which is incredible. Bartolomeo has a really nice sticking effect. So if he'd be KO'd, you can just trash an event. Requires you to have an event. It's kind of similar to the old Marco, right? Which is pretty cool. And then on play, you can also activate a 3-cost event if you have one. And Lucci is probably not going to get too much bigger, whilst you can build into mill a little bit. A lot of the mill sort of goes neg in hand, so you're trading potential power on Lucci for cards in hand, which is However, he is just a big unit. He's probably going to be 7k or maybe even 8k by the end of the game. And then on play, if you do have something you want to get rid of, you can draw one. Moving down here in the bottom left, the Secret Luffy, you're probably not going to pull it. But if you do, it's probably the best rush option in the game. And also has that silly effect where your opponent basically can't play blockers or counter events. Pyrodocking 6 and Nico Robin, both nice big characters. Robin can be a blocker when you have 10 or more cards in trash, which she herself helps you get to that point by giving you a nice draw 2, trash 2 cycle. And then Pirate Docking can summon a 2. There's a couple of 2s that you'd be willing to summon. The Chopper Searcher is not the worst. Mainly that the Zoro blocker, though, is the really good one. But even if you're not summoning anything, just being a 5/7, pretty solid. Moving down here to the bottom right, again, some of these cards are very, very crazy. Both of these Enels, they're not going to have the 10k stat line for too long because we're not playing the Enel leader. However, they're both still 6/8s with pretty reasonable effect. The secret one gets you rid of a search, and the other one can be a blocker if you want him to be. Now this Ryuma, for the rarity, I think this is one of the best cards in the set. Obviously, it might not be as good as some of the SRs and secrets in the set, but this is really powerful. Being able to KO a restive 4 on play and when attacking on a 6/8 body is really good. If your opponent happens to be playing 4-drops, which if they're on evens, they probably are, by the time you get to drop this on 7, that 4-drop's going to be rested and you can just blow it up. And then if they've played another one, well, you just get to continually blow up all of their 4-drops, which is really good. Moving over to Kyros and Calgara, they're a little bit more niche. Kyros only works in Rainbow Luffy because you're not going to gain Rush in any other deck. Although I suppose you could play him anyway, he's still a 3/5 body. And then on KO, you just get to add him back to your hand. So you always have this Rush option. And Rush is underrated in Sealed because your opponent won't necessarily expect it. Calgara's effect is a little bit mid. There's not that many Shandian Warriors or Noland cards in this set. But you don't have to use the effect. You can still just play him as a 3/5. And if you think you've got enough Shandians in your deck, you could consider using the effect. Moving into the middle, I think these are two of the best two. Sabo in Rainbow Luffy, you get to activate any Dressrosa event. And there are some pretty good ones in this set that we'll talk about later. And then he's just a 9k blocker. And Zoro gets to apply Character Rush and buff your leader by 2k. Leader buffs are something we've not seen a lot of in Sealed, but when they've been present, they've been really powerful, and this one is so cheap and so free. Speaking of leader buffs, 10-cost Luffy, if you pull him, will buff you to 7, and then he's a massive blocker. It's a great card. Moving on to the blockers, and the first archetype of blockers I want to talk about are Chump Blockers. These are blockers that are usually relatively cheap, have relatively low power, and the effects, usually nothing too crazy. All of these fit into this threshold. Yama can play out something, but the things it plays out aren't very good. Sentomaru is probably the standout here, because when you block, if your life is low, you just get to draw 1. That's genuinely just a good effect. And Rebecca can also do a search as well as just be a chump blocker, which is honestly not bad. Whilst I advise against searchers, you're primarily playing this as a blocker. And then if she finds a card, will she replace herself in hand, which is great. The rest of these, nothing too crazy. Zoro has some protection effects, but there's not that much removal, and also you're not going to have that many Straw Hat Crew type characters. Although do note, this is the target that can be summoned back off pirate docking. That is really good. Next up, great blockers, and this is the category I like to use for blockers either with really good effects, really good stat lines, or both. Starting from the top left, Morgan and Sai are both value generation blockers. Morgan lets you put a Don on one of your opponent's guys, and then more importantly, put a Don on one of your guys, a rested Don, which is really good. And then Sai can sometimes trash an event to draw 2 when he comes down, which is strong. Kuro has a really nice stat line at 7k. 7k blockers, very underrated. And if you do combo this with something like a Morgan, you could potentially freeze one of your opponent's guys. Robin and Enel and Sabo, we've already talked about, but these have incredible stat lines. And also Luffy, we've already talked about him as well. Usopp and Pearl are sort of more defensive-oriented blockers. Pearl, you're not going to be attacking with him very much, but can let you take out some of your opponent's stuff when he does go down, similar to Lucky Roo. And Usopp can rest something when you block and let him die, which is pretty cool. Borsalino is one of the most cracked cards in the game in Constructed, and being a heal and a blocker and a 1k and a 6k stat line, this does so much. If you're lucky enough to pull this, slam him in your deck immediately. And Sanji otherwise would be a chump blocker, but I think his effect is good enough to bring him into this category because he gives unblockable, and there is not a lot of unblockable in this set. Now, there are only 2 underwhelming blockers in this set in my eyes. Divine Soldier, you're just not going to have 6 or less Don in your field for most of the game, so I don't think this is worth playing. And Raki has a bad stat line, and the on-play is very niche. If you have the Calgara in hand, you're gaming, but if you don't, the rest of the targets are kind of cheeks. Now, moving on to events, and first up a slide on Enel's events, because he has quite a lot. Firstly, these 3 on the right. If you're playing Rainbow Luffy, these are 2Ks, but they're only for your leader. So whilst these all have pretty useful effects, maybe not so much Varie. Giving something +2 cost could dodge a threshold, but it's not as good as some of the others in my opinion. But these all being 2Ks for your leader does give them extra use case. Mama Ragen is actually really nice for the main effect. The counter effect is not going to be as live as it is in Enel because you're going to go above 6 Don. But the main effect letting you draw 1 and rest and potentially like a chump blocker or something, that could be pretty good. And Lightning Dragon freezing something and drawing a card is probably the best of the bunch. And that's why this one doesn't have a counter effect. In terms of events that are only activate mains, they've sort of got these in 2 categories. You've got removal on top and utility on the bottom. There's usually not a lot of removal in sealed, so any bit of removal can be absolutely clutch. In particular, I would watch out for Black Rope Dragon Twister, because this can remove 2 things for 1 card, and that's very, very value efficient. If you remember, what was the Blackbeard one? Not Black Hole. I can't remember. The Blackbeard Pirates event that removed a 6 and a 4. Well, this KO's a 6 and a 5, and yes, that may activate an on-KO, but if you get this off at a key moment, this is still going to be incredible. And then along the bottom, all of these have different sort of utility effects. A lot of them revolve around drawing cards. This one draws 2. This one draws 1 and gives you a buff. This one draws 1, and this is basically just a draw 1. It cycles out. And then these last two are a bit more niche. I find it embarrassing is only really going to be live late game because you do have to have 10 in your trash, which isn't easy and sealed. And Would You Let Me Eat the Flame Fruit is incredible when combined with the Lucy SR. But on its own, it's a bit mid. Double attack and 3k power and a draw 2. All good effects. Are they worth 7 Don? Maybe not, because you're passing the rest of your turn. Now, in terms of pure counter events, there's only really one that I thought was worth highlighting. And this does have a main effect, but I think the main effect's not amazing. But this is just a 0 cost. What's not to love? And finally, in terms of hybrid events, these are some of the best ones. Distorted Future, being able to reduce your opponent's character's power, is cool for board control. Gum Gum Golden Rifle's high roll is exquisite, but also the counter event is very good. It's an order, do not defy me. The main effect of this one is more usable than you might imagine, because don't forget, they might just give Don to their characters and attacks. If they put 2 Don on their character, you can freeze it, and it's also a 4k for your lead. I'll Whip You into Shape can also help with board control, letting you attack active characters with your leader, because that's probably the only sword type you're going to have. And finally, Gum Gum Storm is a little bit hard to use, because you have to have 15 cards in your trash for each of the effects, but the effects are very good. This one may not be worth including though, because the threshold is quite high. Now, before we get into picks for my favourite cards in this set, I want to highlight 2 things, both this Fuza and the Holly. Both of these cards have weird translations going on at the minute. In the Discord, they have different translations. The publicly available English translated images, both of them say all of your Shura characters. Now, this screen grab is taken from the official One Piece Asia EN website. That is the most reliable source in my opinion, as these are, at least for Asia, the official translations. Will we get it differently in English? Maybe, but I think unlikely. The Asia EN website is usually very reliable. And what these do is give your Shura cards, and this character, that's less relevant, unblockable. And then your opponent's turn, all of your Shura cards base power, and this character, becomes 6,000. So if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, your leader has the name Shura. So this gives your Rainbow Luffy leader unblockable, and then your opponent's turn, it's a 6k on defense. For 3 Don. Now that's crazy. That's really crazy. And this Holly does the same thing for Ohm. Of course, Rainbow Luffy is also named Ohm. And then your leader has double attack. And it does the same thing where your leader becomes 6k. If you pull either of these, and you can drop them on 3, that's incredible. Being able to make your leader unblockable or double attack for the entire game, and a 6k on defense. These are, in my opinion, the 2 best cards in the set for their rarity. These are commons. These are commons. Be careful when you rest these, because if you attack with them, your opponent's going to try and get rid of these at all costs, because they just generate so much value. So be careful, but these cards are crazy. Now, in terms of other cards to watch out for, both Smokoshiki and Zeph can give your leader a bit of a buff, which is brilliant. Being 7k on defense, or 7k for the entire turn, is great. And this Zeph can also be used to great effect in Red Sanji, because you can just give him Rush. Down the bottom left here, I've cut off a bit of Kobe's text, so apologies for that. But both of these cards generate you value and are sticky bodies. Kuma heals you on play, and on KO burns your opponent. Kobe lets you draw cards as you play board, and then if your opponent wants to take him out, you can just trash 1 card from your hand instead, which is crazy. More sticky bodies up in the top right. Your opponent doesn't really want to take these out. Alvida, you control whether they can, and she generates value. Sanji is okay, but he's only at 4k. But when your opponent does kill him, you can bring out something else if you have something. But be a little more wary with this one, because it is locked to yellow. And then finally, the Arlong, if they do kill him, you can just like freeze 2 of their rested Dons, which is kind of mad. This on KO is really good, and he generates, again, value with Dons over time. Wiper's just a generically good card. Power Down's good for board control. And then he, again, gives you Dons over time. There's a lot of stuff in this set that gives you a lot of rested Dons. So watch out for that. And finally, Brook and Krieg are both sort of closers. Krieg's Activate main may be relevant. It's going to depend how much Don your opponent gives to their characters. But in a pinch, this could be really, really powerful for taking out board. And it's also just a big rush guy. And Brook being able to restand one of your characters is going to make your lethals much more explosive. Even if you play this on your lethal turn, you get to rest their blocker and then put the remaining 4 Don on something and swing big twice. That seems pretty good to me. Now, in terms of some more sleeper picks, Monkey D. Luffy, if you can meet his conditions, great. You're going to struggle to meet the 2nd or 3rd one, but this can just be a 7-9 with 10 cost, which is pretty cool. Sure is Emergency Rush. It's not great, but if you are struggling for cards in your deck, this just having Rush in emergency, you can play it and try and go for a dodgy lethal. Robin, Nami, and Gin are all summoners with not many targets. If you have the targets for these, they're brilliant, but If not, they're less powerful. Although I will say that Gin just being a 671k is decent already. And the Robin is a 7/7 that draws you a card at baseline. So that's still not the worst. Buggy can just give himself Arrested Don every turn so that he swings for 5. And then on KO you draw a card. And all of these guys on the bottom get you little bits of value in different ways. And they're all decent bodies at 4/5 stat line. Jin Zhao's all about the card draw. You draw some, your opponent has to lose some. Kuma gets a bit of a freeze, which is cool. Holy Jones can restand your leader at a fairly high cost. And Charlotte Lola, your opponent's got to be careful when they take this out, because this can potentially get back something pretty crazy, or at the very worst, a 2k. Now finally, some OP15 specific tips. In this set, there are a ridiculous amount of 2ks. You're going to end up cutting a lot. If you see your pile and you're cutting like 8 2ks, I don't think that's that crazy. I wouldn't go below 10, but between sort of 10 and 14 is the range where you're going to want to be. I'm usually around 12. There's some really powerful unblockable, but there's not that much of it. Be careful before going to 0 life, because Fuza and Sanji are both lower rarity. Your opponent is likely to have copies of these in their decks. So if you can stick at 1, I would personally. Vanilla 2Ks are back to uncommon, so your curve might be less consistent. It's a bit weird that they've chosen to do this. It is what it is. In this set, I think first versus second will depend on your card pool. If you pull a lot of 4s and 6s, take second. If you pull a lot of 5s and 7s, take first. In general, I think I'm going to take first. There's a lot of really nice 5 drops, especially those 5/6 vanilla 2Ks. So you're always going to have a play on 5. You could whiff on 4, depending on how many 4 drops you play. There are a lot of archetype lock cards and bad cards this set. A lot of the stuff in blue is pretty poor. A lot of the 3 costs that are designed for Rebecca. Some of the events are pretty bad, and a lot of the Enel cards, all the priests, are pretty underwhelming. So I think it's going to be pretty easy to build your deck this set. There's low removal, but what removal there is very powerful, and watch out for power down, because there's quite a lot of red power down effects in this set. There's also a fair amount of rush. Normally in Sealed, you don't see much rush at all. But in this set, you've even got some sort of lower rarity rush, like the Kairos. So do be careful about getting rushed down. There's not that much, but for Sealed, it's actually quite a high volume. And finally, there are quite a number of ways to increase leader power. We've not really seen anything like this sort of prominence in Seal before. So it's going to be quite unique. And it also potentially devalues 5k units. So don't be afraid to cut some lower power characters for some more powerful ones, if you expect that your opponents are going to put a lot of Holies and Fuzas. So that's it. Thank you for watching. Good luck at your pre-releases. Let me know how you do. Let me know what pulls you get. If there's any cards in the set that you think I missed, please let everyone know in the comments. We all just want to win here. And if this is your very first event, I hope you have a lovely time. One Piece card game has great local players. Everyone that I've interacted with has been very friendly, and I'm sure you'll have a blast. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.